Sometimes when we're faced with too much stress or emotion, the memory of that time usually sticks to us until we grow older. Doesn't matter how many years pass, the memory is there, and it lingers, and it will usually remind you out of the blue. And just like that, it's like you're warped in time. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, and share this video with your friends. This is true for many of us, and in these times we can only reminisce at what the past has brought us, either happiness or tears. The most amazing thing out of this whole process is getting to remember the people who were there for you and have helped you overcome such a memorable experience. This story is about a certain fireman who, though now retired, saved one little life in particular. Out of the many times he's helped and saved people, it was this rescue that has continued to stay on his mind ever since. It was an unforgettable rescue and one that has changed his views. Mike Hughes was then the captain of the Wenatchee Washtenaw Fire Department when he was called to an emergency house fire rescue. Little did he know that this rescue alone will change his entire life and his outlook and perception of how precious life is. After getting the call about the fire, Mike and his crew knew that they had to make haste. Fighting fire was their occupation, but most of the time when a life is involved, it takes more than just knowledge about the mission to save a life. It was an oath they took. On the way to the scene, all of them were antsy. Even though he had been working as a fireman for most of his life, responding to scenes where someone is stuck inside always gets him very nervous. He and his crew know that time was of the essence, and this was going to either make or break them. When they got to the address, there were lots of people flocking to the scene and waiting for help to come. They immediately jumped out of the truck and rummaged for things to bring inside the house. They were well aware that there was someone they needed to be saved, but they weren't prepared to find out what it was inside. People were shouting, and they knew that they were helpless against the fire that was engulfing the house. The scene was something out of a horror movie, and Mike could feel all the pressure from the people shouting for them to help the person inside. Mike and his team busted into the house all covered in flames. The plan was to salvage as much as they can find and save anyone who might still be stuck inside. His team scoured the kitchen and the living room, while he went straight for the bedrooms up in the hall. He banged on doors and went from one room to another to find any survivors. However, it was that one room that stopped him on his tracks. At first he thought it was something else, but when he opened the door wider and got closer, he was shocked and immediately headed to the burning crib. Mike saw a burning crib inside the master's bedroom. At first, he thought it was a teddy bear curled up at the center, but something inside him told him that it wasn't what he thought it was and that he should take a closer inspection. His heart was beating so fast. Then, when Mike reached the crib, it was beginning to get more obvious to him that the thing turned out to be a little human. It was a baby. Mike recalls, "When we arrived, a large part of the house was already engulfed in flames. I found the baby curled up in a crib in the bedroom." His eyes widened in shock as if he was stunned at the sight. A baby was in the least of his expectations to be trapped inside the house. How could this have happened? And what was he going to do next? Obviously, with a baby around, the extraction had to happen immediately. Mike grabbed the baby and rushed out of the house, carefully avoiding the debris and the falling ceiling. He passed some of his team, and they were shocked too at what he had in his arms. Nobody told them there was a baby inside. He signaled for his team, and they all rushed out of the burning house. Had Mike and his team arrived minutes later, things would have taken a turn for the worse, and this was not something that neither of them wanted. As soon as he got the baby out of the house, the paramedics immediately got him to hand the baby over. Mike and some of his colleagues needed to do one last search inside while the others were busy hosing down the property. When they didn't find anybody else, they headed out and focused on putting the fire out and making sure that none of the people flocking would be endangered to the smoke. Being a fireman in general is a risky job. When you respond to emergencies, it's not something that you could predict, as there are a lot of variables you need to take into consideration. So it's not a redundant scenario like you would with an office job. Mike carried this incident with him for the rest of his remaining career. It was his third time doing that type of rescue, and it wasn't something that he could easily forget only because it involved a baby. He also did not know what happened to the baby right after he passed her on to the paramedics for inspection. A few years after the rescue, Mike had retired, and so He had a lot of time on his hands. However, he still could feel the unease of not knowing what happened to the 9-month-old baby he rescued, even thought it had already been so many years that passed. He asked around, including his team who were with him during that day. He needed some type of information on the baby, and he wanted to check on her if she made it. He had rescued so many people before, but this one stuck with him like glue because a baby was just too innocent to be in that kind of situation. Mike had trouble sleeping because he kept on wondering what had happened to the child he had rescued. What was only a simple look back on his career as a fireman turned into more of a hunt to know what had happened to the youngest human he had ever rescued from a fire. In every profession that requires you to rescue and interact with people, there will always be a memory that sticks to you forever. And in this case, Mike was hit with that realization. He needed to know more about the child he rescued, and if she was living her best life, but no one in his team knew who this child was, despite remembering what happened. Mike still had close ties with his mother, and he was pretty open to her about his life. She was like his best friend, someone who he could talk to with just about anything under the sun. In one particular visit he had to her, he brought up how he was uneasy and conscious of the fact that he wanted to know more about the baby whom he had rescued many years ago. Although Mike's mother was like his confidant, he had never expected for her to respond like she did. She had always been proud of him, and so whenever he makes the headlines, she keeps newspaper clippings of him, and that's when she remembered. She had a lead, and she was going to help her son find the baby he rescued. Little did Mike know that his mother kept newspaper clippings of his achievements all along. Whenever he and his team would make the headlines, she was so eager to cut them out of the newspaper and keep them organized in a folder. This was her way of making sure she does not forget how lucky she is to have her son. So when Mike told her that he had this worry about not being able to find the baby he once rescued, she immediately got up and headed to her room. Mike was confused at first, but when she emerged with a folder in hand, he knew his mother was up to something. She was the perfect person to help him. When Mike saw the newspaper clipping, to say that he was amazed was such an understatement. He did not expect for his mother to do this. He searched every record she had. He browsed them one by one in hopes he would see it, until the very last one. Mike had finally found a lead. He found the clipping and saw the baby's name, Dailydose Davison. Although Mike could not remember all of the names of the people he had saved, this baby was by far the most memorable. He felt compelled to find out where she is and how she has been doing since. He quickly took note of the baby's name. In the age of social media, it's always easier to find people you're trying to look for. So Mike took to Facebook as it was the only way he could think of to find her. He calculated the years, and he reckoned that the little girl should already been a teenage by now. Now that he had her name, Mike was very eager to find her. He typed in her name in hopes he could find her right away. But when the results were displayed, he was shocked to find that there were many others who had the same name. He messaged these people one by one, crossing fingers that one would respond and confirm that it was indeed her. It didn't take long when the responses to his messages started pouring in. He was excited to have received a bunch of replies, but quickly realized that they weren't the little girl he was looking for all along. But he kept pushing forward because he really wanted to find her. He searched some more and messaged each one that might be her. He received a reply after another reply, but it still wasn't her. He was nearing the very last of the list, and he still has not had any luck. He slowly began to lose hope until one response changed his life. Dailydose Davison was just minding her own teenage life when a message to her Facebook popped up. She had received a weird message from an old man named Mike Hughes. She was confused and did not really understand what it had meant. After all, she would not remember that fateful day as she was just 9 months old. Dailydose said in an interview, "I was just kind of confused at first. I didn't know any of this had happened." So she asked her parents about a possible fire when she was younger. It was then she was told that she had almost died had it not been for the firemen who braved the fire and rescued her. Mike had sent countless messages to countless people who were named the same. And in his messages, it was always the same. "I sent her a note that said, 'I think I pulled you out of a fire when you were a baby,'" Mike recalled. Dailydose's parents were shocked to find out that someone had messaged their daughter about a fire from many years ago. But how can they be so sure that this was not some internet creep and that it was the fireman who saved Dailydose when she was a baby? Because the internet these days is full of online predators, it was very difficult for Danielle and her parents to take Mike's word for it just because he told a little tidbit about what happened many years ago. So they figured that if Mike was really who he said he was, then they needed to ask the right question that only the firemen in attendance would know. Danielle decided to respond. According to Mike, she replied and said, "And she gave me a test." She wrote back, "Oh yeah, what was my mom doing?" It had already been almost 2 decades, and with the many people he saved, can Mike remember that day? As soon as Mike received that message, he smiled to himself. Out of all the people he rescued, the baby whom he pulled out of a fire was the most memorable one. So, of course, he knew every single detail about what happened that day, even down to the very moment his heart skipped a beat upon seeing a baby inside a burning crib. Mike answered Danielle. I replied, "Well, she was at work and your dad was there," he said. As soon as Danielle and her parents read his answer, they were stunned. It had already been so long, yet he still took it to heart and remembered what happened. For Mike, it was simply recalling a simple rescue that turned out to have such a great impact on his life. It was the perfect answer, and to Mike, it was a sense of relief that finally he had found the baby he saved and that she grew up to be a fine young lady with a pretty normal life. Meanwhile, for Danielle, it had felt like she had a fresh pair of eyes. The realization dawned on her that if it weren't for the man who saved her, she wouldn't be here in this world. Mike and Danielle remained in contact for a while. They exchanged messages every so often, and she even updated him on how everything was in school, as well as the extracurricular activities she loved participating in. It was an instant connection with both of them. Danielle and Mike had already spent so much time catching up and bonding over similar tastes in food and music. She also expressed how she loved track and athletics so much, something that Mike had also felt proud of. She was doing so well. However, the icing on the cake came as Danielle asked him this one thing. Danielle had a big event coming up, and now that she knew who her hero was, she decided to invite him over because, after all, she would not even be here if he didn't save her. She wanted Mike to be there during her graduation, and she wanted him to know that she thinks of him now as family. While Mike was busy with his own life, he had not expected a surprise mail to arrive. While he was sorting all the mail that came in, he noticed something that was out of the ordinary. It was a black envelope, and when he opened it, he felt overwhelmed and just touched. When Mike opened the envelope, he realized that it was indeed from Danielle, judging by the photo inside the card. He was overcome with a sense of pride. She invited him over for graduation. She sent me an invitation, so I thought, by golly, I'm going, he said. It meant an awful lot to me. I was really happy.